Hello, and welcome to our talk on the Eucharist and the early church. In the first part of my series, I discussed the controversy of the Bread of Life sermon that Jesus gave in the Gospel according to John. Today we're going to look closer at the Last Supper and what it meant and the symbolism in the New Testament and in light of the Old Testament as well. I have my notes that I'm referring to, a paper on which I wrote titled, exactly what this series is called, The Eucharist and the Early Church. If you would like to see this paper, by all means email me and I'll be more than glad to send you a copy of my paper. The question I asked was, what was Christ doing by breaking bread and drinking wine with his disciples? Well, he was not only establishing a memorial, but a covenant, a new covenant. Now that's kind of obvious if we read the Gospel where it says, this is the blood of the new covenant. But we can't take it lightly. We can't take the covenant that Christ was making lightly. One thing to be noted was the night and manner in which he established this new covenant. It was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, also known as the Passover. A celebration observed by every Jew. The purpose of this feast was to reaffirm the covenant made by God to the Hebrew people, as mentioned in Leviticus 23 verse 5. This meal included lamb, bitter herbs, water, and salt, unleavened bread, and at least 4 cups of wine. On this night, Jesus had planned to change the Passover forever. And he accomplished that. He fulfilled that. It can be seen in many of the denominations today that commemorate the Last Supper. Matthew writes in his Gospel account, "Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, 'Take, eat. This is my body.' And he took a chalice, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" The key to understand what the Last Supper truly meant to the early Christians, we need to see the symbolism the early Christians may have seen at that time. The lamb offered at the Passover was the same lamb in which blood was taken from to place on the doorpost, their lintels, as it was commanded by God. So death would pass over them. The unleavened bread was referred to as the bread of affliction. According to Luke, when Jesus spoke of the wine being his blood, it was the second cup that he held up. A cup commonly referred to as the cup of salvation in a Jewish Passover Seder. So how does this all fit? How does it connect? Where is the juxtaposition? Well, the bread of affliction, which Jesus likened his body unto, his same body would undergo an affliction. It would be whipped. It would be mutilated. It would be forced to carry the cross. His blood was seen as salvation. But instead of placing it on the doorposts of their homes, they placed it on the doorposts of their hearts. And the death of Jesus has always been seen as not necessarily the death of Jesus, but the resurrection. That death has no grasp on us anymore. Much like the blood was to the early Jewish people. This view was upheld by some early Christians, such as Melito of Sardis. Now this is where I'm going to go outside of the Bible, and I'm going to use what the early people of the times thought. And we have direct quotes here. Melito of Sardis wrote, "This is he who is our Passover. This is he who in Abel was slaughtered, in Jacob was exiled, in Joseph was sold, in Moses was exposed, in the Lamb was immolated." Why is this significant to the early Christians, you may ask? We must remember that the first Christians were observant Jews. And they understood the concept of covenant. To the ancient Israelites, the covenant was more than just a simple contract. It was a way for God to establish a covenant with his people. An everlasting covenant. a covenant that made God their God and the Israelites his people. This is seen in the Old Testament in the passage in Ezekiel 36, verse 28, when it says, "You shall be my people, and I will be your God." It was through covenant that Israel became a people of God. The covenant with Noah, Abraham, and both covenants that he made with Moses play a large role for the Israelites. In it, God revealed a different way of life. Yet the promise of the covenant stayed the same. As Israel grew and developed, the covenant would begin to take on a different form, one right after the other. The Last Supper account was no different, because in it the apostles saw the importance of commemorating the Last Supper. Why else would they do it on a weekly basis? Why else would they gather on the Lord's Day, as it is recorded in the Bible, to break bread, if they did not see the importance of the covenant behind the Last Supper? You see, we just can't simply accept the symbolism in the bread and wine. We need to understand that by us participating in this communion, we are participating in the same covenant that was established on the night Jesus Christ was betrayed and condemned to death. Death on the cross. We need to understand that when we receive communion, whether it is in the Catholic Church, whether it is in any other denomination, we are saying yes to thousands of years of revelation through the Old Testament. We are affirming that yes, we are Christian, that yes, we will die for Christ. I think if people truly knew what was being done up at that altar or in churches, they would think twice and examine themselves. But the Bible says more. The Bible talks a lot about the Eucharist. And even when it's not talking directly about the Eucharist, it talks indirectly about it. We can see this in Corinthians, in Romans. We can also see it especially in Revelation, which we'll get into at a later time. Thank you for watching this second part. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you join us for the third installment. Thank you very much.